It's time to take a dive into the numbers for Spencer Knight, Artyom Levshunov, Wyatt Kaiser, and more of the Blackhawks defense.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now your number one sports podcasting network where we bring you your team every day. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. On today's episode, it's time for Part 2 of Deep Dive 2.0, where I'll go through the stats and analytics for every Blackhawks defenseman, plus their two goaltenders then in Segment 2. And for Segment 3, I'll also dive into what a potential return from Laurent Brossoit could mean for the Hawks goaltending group moving forward. But first, do have to let you all know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Go and download the FanDuel app now, or simply visit FanDuel.com to get $300 worth of bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. All right, happy Thanksgiving Eve, Blackhawks fans. Cannot believe that Turkey Day has nearly already arrived. Hope everyone is bundling up out there as the temperatures are dropping pretty rapidly here in the Chicagoland area after having a 50-degree day back on Tuesday, down into the low 40s here today. And from what I looked at on my forecast, which, definitely could be inaccurate, but looks like that could even be the last day in the 40s for this next 10-day stretch. So hope everyone is staying warm out there. Looks like that hockey and winter weather is surely on its way. But picking up where I left off from yesterday's episode, where I covered all of the forwards, make sure to go and check out Part 1 of Deep Dive 2.0 if you happen to miss it. But for Segment 1 here today, it's time to get into a breakdown of all the Blackhawks defensemen as well as their goaltenders. And starting first with the greater takeaways in terms of what we've learned about this young defensive group through the opening 22 games now on the season. I don't think it's been perfect defensively from this group, but considering the lack of experience, considering how young they are on the back end, I definitely feel like they've held up better than most of us expected going into the start of the year, right? And while part of that is definitely because of the consistent goaltending that they've gotten through these first 22 games, I do feel altogether, while it hasn't been perfect, there have definitely been some shoddy performances, but they've been few and far between, and that's been a pleasant surprise to me and I believe all of us Blackhawks fans. However, in the midst of this opening quarter of the season, we have kind of seen some ups and downs from a few young defensemen, which is typical for players who are early on in their NHL careers on the back end. And it was a little bit of a shaky start for Artyom Levshunov. I've referenced his kind of inconsistent training camp, preseason, and start to the regular season, which led to him getting healthy scratched for the home opener against the Montreal Canadiens. And then Sam Rinzel, as of late, has not necessarily been in a groove or been playing his best hockey, or at least living up to the expectations that maybe some of us unfairly put on him going into his first full NHL campaign. But again, those are typical, especially for guys who are more so known for their puck moving abilities and offensive play when they first step onto the NHL scene. And it's more so how about you're going to respond from those moments or a little bit of tough stretches. And we've seen Artyom Levshunov respond really well after getting healthy scratched for the third game of the season. Has been, the leading scorer among Blackhawks defensemen so far this year, and has definitely been having more standout performances than he did during the early going. So hopefully, Sam Rinzel will be able to kind of do the same thing here over these next couple of weeks, get right, and start providing a big impact for the Blackhawks on the defensive side of things. But it's definitely been easier to kind of allow those guys to go through learning curves and bumps in the road because Jeff Blashill is frequently dressing 7 defensemen in the lineup, which I think is definitely the correct team for the position they're in right now. It does kind of admittedly suck for someone like, Landon Slaggert, who probably is the 12th forward on this team right here, right now, but sadly isn't getting in the lineup on as consistent of a basis as I'm sure he would like, just because they're only dressing 11, but it's for the greater good of the team. And because of the diverse roles that some of these guys play on the back end, right? Whereas Louis Crevier, Alex Vlasic, Connor Murphy, they're defensive stalwarts, and as I'll get into here in just a second, are frequently used in the defensive zone. Whereas, Artyom Levshunov, Sam Rinzel, Matt Grzelcyk, more known for their puck-moving abilities, they get a lot of offensive zone starts, and those first two guys I mentioned get time on the man advantage. So there's a different makeup for, half of this defensive group compared to one another, and that's allowed Blashill to kind of mix and match his pairings together. And also when, a young defenseman doesn't bring their best stuff with them for a certain game, it allows him to utilize them in that seventh defenseman role and have someone who maybe is rolling a little bit better that evening or whatever, step in and take on some additional minutes. So I really do believe going with seventh defenseman, it hasn't worked well for the Blackhawks in ages, but has been really nice for them to open up this 25-26 season. One thing I also want to add about the Blackhawks defense as a whole is I am a little bit surprised in the lack of offensive output that we've got from this group so far this year. I definitely thought they were going to be much more involved on the offensive side of things, and that really hasn't been the case, particularly for someone like Sam Rinzel, someone like Wyatt Kaiser, both who I'll get into here in just a moment, haven't been racking up as many points as I expected so far this season. But getting into the stats and analytics for each of the seven defensemen currently on the Blackhawks roster, starting off with the leading scorer among the seventh defensemen, which is Artyom Levshunov, second overall pick in the 2024 NHL draft, has yet to score that first NHL goal. It continues to elude him, but does lead the Blackhawks blue line with 11 assists, giving him 11 points on the year, is a +0 in terms of his plus minus, and has 12 penalty minutes so far through his opening 21 games. The only contest that he did miss was that home opener, which I mentioned a moment ago. But Levshunov's playmaking, while a vast majority of those assists have not been primaries, and 6 of them, by the way, have come on the man advantage. So only 5 points in 21 games for Artie at even strength. However, if you've actually been watching Blackhawks games, you could tell he's growing in confidence. He's becoming more aggressive in the offensive zone, both in generating legitimate chances for himself, which he's gotten a lot of those that just haven't found the back of the net, and also making things happen for his teammates out there, wheeling around nicely in the offensive zone, walking the blue line and making nice, pick plays and drop passes to keep the cycle going. He's clearly getting more and more comfortable on the fly, which has been very impressive. Now, defensively, there have still been some hiccups, which aren't atypical, again, for a young player with not a lot of experience in this league. But that to me is really the side that Artie has to make the biggest and most notable strides in terms of where to improve in his game. Offensively, with the way that he can wheel for his size, had a rush up the ice on Sunday against Colorado that was like, oh my goodness, for a guy who is still only 20 years old, but 6'2", over 200 pounds, he can absolutely move out there and does a really good job as well of recovering, and has broke up numerous, potential partial breakaway attempts for the opposition. He's gone and chased those down. So his skating ability for a player of his size, along with his offensive abilities and knowing how to cycle in the offensive zone, I do think he has a pretty decent shot as well, right? You can see the offensive upside. It's just about growing and become a little bit more consistent defensively, which altogether, I do think he's improved in that department. Kind of has had some shaky defensive outings in the last week or so, but altogether, it's been much cleaner and much more structured defensively out of Artie, and I really do like that. So he's coming into his own. Leading all Blackhawks defensemen in points this year is not surprising considering the way he's been trending in the right direction in recent weeks. 23 shots on goal for Artie in 21 games. I do think, he still has room to grow in that department. However, I did see Rinkside General, great Blackhawks YouTube/Twitter account, point out that Artie maybe isn't putting the puck on net as often because he's making smarter decisions with the puck in terms of getting it in a more dangerous spot to one of his teammates instead of just rifling a softie on net that could potentially lead to the puck possession being gained by the other team. I do think there is something to that. However, I still want to see Artie rifle the puck a little bit more, and he has been doing that over these last couple of weeks. In terms of ice time, now up to 16 minutes and 21 seconds on the year, has been growing in terms of his role after being in that seventh defenseman spot to open things up. And has chipped in for 20 block shots along with 23 hits. I do think he hasn't been overtly physical, and I would like to see him add a little bit of that fire and, mustard and jam to his game a little bit there. But I do think that's something that's going to happen with time. And then getting into the analytics, 47.7 Corsi for percentage for Artyom Levshunov. That is second among all Blackhawks defensemen. Has been on the ice for 14 goals for to 13 goals against. But as I mentioned a moment ago, majority of his zone starts come in the offensive zone, 67.2% of them to be exact, which is the highest, I believe, among all Blackhawks defensemen. So predominantly used in the offensive zone. Despite that, still has been on the ice for 13 goals against to 14 goals for. So hasn't been the cleanest defensively, but undoubtedly has made an impact on the offensive side of things. And not surprised to see he has one of the better Corsi for percentages for the Blackhawks because he starts in so many offensive situations, but is definitely helping the Blackhawks generate goals out there when he is getting time in the offensive zone. So real good stuff from Artyom Levshunov so far in his opening 21 games this season. Next up, we go to Louis Crevier, who surprisingly is second among all Blackhawks defensemen in points with 2 goals and 8 assists for 10 points. Him and Alex Vlasic are the only 2 defensemen with more than 1 goal on the season. Crevier's +7 plus-minus rating is also tied for the team lead among defensemen. And also what's really impressive is all 10 of his points have come from the even strength variety. He doesn't play on the Blackhawks power play whatsoever, but still 10 even strength points through 21 games for Big Lou Crevier. A very pleasant surprise. 27 penalty minutes, a little bit inflated because he got into a fight and I believe also got a game misconduct for that because of it. Really don't think he's, been in the penalty box too often so far this year. 23 shots on goal as well for Louis Crevier, which is tied with Artyom Levshunov. He has an absolute howitzer back there. I believe he's recorded the second hardest shot in the NHL this season. And I love that he makes a simplified play time and time again. I've said it very often here on the show. Some other defensemen I think could take a page out of his playbook. And despite getting 71.4% of his zone starts in the defensive zone compared to Artyom Levshunov's 67.2% that happens in the offensive zone, they have the same amount of shots on goal so far this year, and Artyom Levshunov only has 1 point. I think that goes to show you how solid Louis Crevier has been and why he's gotten a little bit of an uptick in ice time here recently, but still only averaging 13 minutes and 57 seconds of time on ice. Has chipped in for 17 blocks along with 29 hits. Been a nice physical presence at times on the back end, knows how to use his size to separate players from the puck. And then getting into the analytics, 43.8 Corsi for percentage for Lou Crevier, not as good as Artyom Levshunov's. However, like I just mentioned, he plays a lot more often in the defensive zone. And despite all the time he plays in defensive situations and in his own end, Crevier has been on the ice for 16 goals for to only 10 goals against at even strength so far this year. Really impressive stuff on both sides of the puck by the 2020 former 7th round selection. Next, we get into Sam Rinzel, who, as I mentioned, hasn't been as productive as I think we expected going into his first NHL campaign. With 1 goal and 5 assists for 6 points through 21 games so far. Has a +2 plus-minus rating along with 14 penalty minutes. Haven't really had a problem with him having to stay out of the box or anything. No power play points, interestingly enough, for Sam Rinzel, which is really shocking to me because I thought he was going to be a key piece of the Blackhawks power play, which is top 10 in the NHL in the league right now. I mean, they've been very productive, but it hasn't been with Sam Rinzel as their quarterback. It's been Artyom Levshunov who stepped into that spot, and deservedly so, because Rinzel didn't really do anything with that opportunity early on in the year. 30 shots on goal from Sam Rinzel has, I think, at least been a little bit of a bright spot. However, he does play a lot in the offensive zone and was averaging well over 20 minutes per game through the first 10, 12 contests of the year. Now he's down to 17 minutes and 32 seconds as he's been in that 7th defenseman role here as of late. Does have 26 block shots, which outside of Alex Vlasic, that's second most among Blackhawks defensemen. So love to see that Rinzel, an offensive-minded guy, is using that big big old frame of his also in the own zone to prevent pucks from getting towards his goaltender. Has also chipped in for 20 hits. I don't think he's ever going to be a super physical guy, but I love to see that he's a little bit willing at the very least back there with that size. Does have 29 giveaways, which is second most among all Blackhawks defensemen, and would like to see him, instead of forcing passes to his teammates, try to use, his wheels a little bit more frequently and just make the simplified play, especially when getting pucks out of his own end. That's kind of been a problem for him thus far. And then in terms of Rinzel's analytics, 47.2 Corsi for percentage, right behind Artyom Levshunov, has been on the ice for 17 goals for to 15 goals against, with a 52.4 offensive zone start percentage. So more times than not, especially here recently, since he's been bumped down from the top pairing, playing more and more strictly in offensive situations, just because he's kind of been, as I talked about off the jump, a little in over his head in the defensive zone thus far. But altogether, 15 goals against in 21 games played for the role that he was playing early on in the season. It's not god awful by any means, and these statistics don't look dreadful. There are just some decision-making things that I believe Sam Rinzel needs to clean up, and hopefully he'll be able to do that here over these next few weeks. Next, we get to Matt Grzelcyk. We get to Alex Vlasic. Don't mean to skip the top pairing left-handed defenseman here for Chicago. 2 goals, 3 assists, 5 points for Alex Vlasic on the season. Never going to be known for his offensive contributions, but hasn't been, too involved, I feel like, in the cycle so far this year. It's led to him only having 5 points, -3 plus-minus rating, although I do feel like that's kind of a symptom of the role that he plays for this team, as I'll get into here in just a second. Only 20 shots on goal, though, for Alex Vlasic, and I know he plays mostly in defensive spots, but I do feel like he's another one of these defensemen who could be shooting the puck a little bit more frequently. Averaging 21 minutes and 21 seconds of time on ice, leads all Blackhawks defensemen. No surprise there. 36 blocks, also leads all Blackhawks defensemen. Is chipped in for 13 hits. It's just clear that's never really going to be a strength for Alex Vlasic, but it would be something I'd like him to utilize a little bit more. By the way, only 5 penalty minutes for Alex Vlasic this year, which came in a fight against, I believe that was Mackenzie Weegar against the Calgary Flames. So does a really good job for a guy who plays in the D zone a lot in defensive situations of staying out of the sin bin, which is really key because he's also playing a crucial role for the Blackhawks penalty kill. And then in terms of the analytics for Alex Vlasic, 42.1 Corsi for percentage is actually the worst among all Blackhawks defensemen. However, 66.8% of his zone starts come in the defensive zone. As I just talked about, he's normally played in his own end. So I do think that definitely impacts the shot attempts that he's giving up when he's playing so frequently in defensive spots. And still has been on the ice for 13 goals for to 17 goals against. Maybe it hasn't been as clean of a start to the season for Alex Vlasic as I would like, but I don't think he's been abysmal or dreadful by any means. And I still feel like more times than not, he does a really good job at getting the puck out of harm's way. Next, we finally go to Matt Grzelcyk, who has 4 points, all assists, and has played in each of the Blackhawks' 22 games so far this season, +7 plus-minus rating, which has him tied for Louis Crevier to lead Blackhawks defenseman. 14 penalty minutes for Grzelcyk. Kind of, was in the box a little bit too often early on, but has cleaned that up in recent weeks. 29 shots on goal for Matt Grzelcyk. Does play a lot in the O zone, but I like his ability and willingness to fire the biscuit on cage. Averaging just 15 minutes and 38 seconds of time on ice. 18 block shots, 10 hits. Chipping in a little bit in those categories that are never necessarily his strengths, but he does, in terms of analytics, lead all Blackhawks defensemen with a 51.6 Corsi for percentage, which, 55.6% of his zone starts come in the offensive zone, but I still think that's pretty gosh darn impressive. And Matt Grzelcyk has, despite a lack of points, has moved the puck well and operated swiftly, I felt like, in the offensive zone, while also not being like a true liability defensively. He's been on the ice for 19 goals for to 12 goals against at even strength this year. I've been pleasantly surprised with what we've gotten out of Matt Grzelcyk. I did not think he'd be operating this smoothly on the back end, but I really don't have too much poor things to say about either him or Connor Murphy on the third pairing so far this year. Next, we get into Wyatt Kaiser, who actually has just 3 assists through 22 games on the season. Does have a +8 plus-minus rating. I misspoke earlier when I said Crevier and Grzelcyk lead the Blackhawks in that category. It's actually Mr. Wyatt Kaiser, but still offensively has not been registering the points that I thought he was going to in the O-zone. And while his speed and his active stick, he makes so many little plays that are to the benefit of the Blackhawks defensively. I've been a little disappointed with the lack of contributions that we've gotten from him offensively, especially in the goal scoring, which the Blackhawks could really use more from their defensemen in that category. And I feel like Wyatt Kaiser is a very capable guy in that one, with his willingness to jump up into the plays, his skating ability. He's got a pretty decent shot. So in that one area in particular, I've been a little bit disappointed with Kaiser. But outside of that, I've loved what we've gotten from number 44 so far this year. But another stat that's a little underwhelming to me is 17 shots on goal. Averaging nearly 20 minutes per game, 19 minutes and 28 seconds on average per contest. Like, Wyatt, you're a mobile, puck-moving defenseman in the O-zone who can open up time and space for himself and his teammates with his skating ability. I just haven't seen him fire the puck all that frequently on cage. Does have 17 block shots along with 16 hits. A couple of those 16 hits have been real big ones. Doesn't do it too frequently, but when he does, he makes it count. And then getting into the analytics, 45.4 Corsi for percentage for Kaiser. Has been on the ice for 21 goals for to 13 goals against. So even if he's not winding up, getting an assist or putting the puck in the back of the cage, still a lot of good things have been happening for the Blackhawks in terms of their offensive output when Wyatt Kaiser has been out there on the ice, and to only have, 13 goals against for someone who still plays a decent amount in defensive situations. 53.5% of his zone starts come in the D zone. To only have been out there for 13 goals against, playing mostly with Artyom Levshunov, who doesn't have a lot of experience. Wyatt Kaiser has been really strong in that department for the Blackhawks so far. And then last but certainly not least, getting into the old man here, Connor Murphy. 3 assists for Murph in 22 games so far this year. -3 plus-minus rating. Not all that surprising, though, like Alex Vlasic, considering where he normally plays and considering he mostly plays in the D zone. To only have 14 penalty minutes, I don't think is that horrendous or anything. 19 shots on goal, by the way, for Connor Murphy. Plays a lot more in the D zone, plays less per game than Alex Vlasic does, yet he's the one who almost has more shots on goal. They basically have the same number. I meant Wyatt Kaiser, not Alex Vlasic. For Connor Murphy to have more shots on goal than Wyatt Kaiser is absolutely crazy, especially when Kaiser's averaging 19 minutes and 28 seconds per game. Connor Murphy's averaging 14 minutes and 46 seconds per game. So yeah, Wyatt Kaiser, throw the biscuit on cage a little bit more. Then Murphy has also chipped in for 20 block shots. That's tied for second most among Blackhawks blue liners. Does a good job of that on the penalty kill. Also, 19 hits. Not as physical as he's been in years past, but still willing to throw it around a little bit. And then the analytics, 42.6 Corsi for percentage for Connor Murphy, but along with the plus-minus, not all that surprising because 77.5% of his zone starts come in the defensive zone. That is even more than Louis Crevier, most among all Blackhawks defensemen, but despite that, has only been on the ice for 9 goals against to 6 goals for at even strength on the season. That's pretty good defensive work out of Connor Murphy, who's in a strictly defensive role, mostly for the Blackhawks at this point in time, with the capable puck-moving and speedy defensemen that they also have on their back end. All right. That takes care of a run-through of the stats and analytics for all 7 of the Blackhawks defensemen this season. Coming up in just a moment, it's time to dive into Spencer Knight and Arvid Soderblom's numbers. But first, I got to show some love to one of today's sponsors, which is FanDuel. The NBA season is here, and like the Blackhawks, the Chicago Bulls are also off to a fast start, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of a game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything, from who will score the next bucket to fourth quarter comebacks. Can also wager on Matas Buzelis, Kobe White, and other key members of the Bulls. Plus, you can also combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a much bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late fourth quarter push. And right now, FanDuel is offering new customers $300 worth of bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So go and head on over to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Segment 2, getting into the two Blackhawks goaltenders now so far this year, and the key takeaways real quick before diving into the stats and analytics for both Spencer Knight and Arvid Soderblom. First and foremost, the Blackhawks have gotten quality goaltending in 95% of their games so far this year. It's really been the backbone, I think, of this team's success, because in this league, if you get good goaltending, you're going to have a chance. And the Blackhawks have gotten good goaltending nearly every single game. And as a result, they've been competitive in all but two of their games so far this year. The ugly 9-3 loss to the Buffalo Sabres, the 6-3 loss to the Winnipeg Jets, where they even cut their deficit to 2 early on in the third period and still had somewhat of a chance in that game. Like, they legitimately have been competitive every single night, and a huge reason for that has been the consistency that they've gotten in between the pipes. And this goaltending tandem has really become a dynamic duo here for Chicago. I know, obviously, the numbers aren't going to reflect that too much here in just a moment because of what occurred on Friday in Buffalo, where Arvid Soderblom just sadly had to wear that one and was hung out to dry from start to finish. But it's been a real difference maker for this team, because coming into the year, we knew the Blackhawks had the speed and had more talent to be a fun squad. But in terms of actually winning games, we knew there was going to be some inconsistent play with them being so young. But goaltending can make a world of difference. And that's exactly what it has done for Chicago so far here in 25-26, in a group that had lots of unknowns in it coming into the season, right? Spencer Knight, obviously a former high first-round selection, a lot of pedigree, but had never been utilized as a true number one. And while, he did some good things to help the Florida Panthers win a Stanley Cup in 23-24, he wasn't the starting goaltender who really drove them to that point. And there were still some inconsistencies we saw out of Knight late last year after being acquired from Florida. And then Arvid Soderblom has been a really big mystery throughout his NHL career. His first 2 seasons, not very good whatsoever. Some of the worst numbers of any goaltender in this league. Turned it around early on last year, but then never looked like the same guy coming out of the Four Nations faceoff. But has really, outside of the game against Buffalo, been a much more consistent goaltender than I feel like we've ever seen at any point of his NHL career thus far. But getting into the stats and analytics for both of these guys, starting, of course, with the number one, Spencer Knight, who is truly playing at a Vezina Trophy caliber level here at the quarter mark of the regular season. He's got a 7-5-3 record, which, doesn't jump off the page at you, but what does is his 2.38 goals against average, which is 5th among all goaltenders in the league with more than 10 starts on the year. Also has a .924 save percentage, which is 1st among all goaltenders in the NHL with more than 10 starts on the season. Has finally gotten his first shutout as a member of the Blackhawks, and altogether in 15 starts has allowed more than 3 goals only twice. Huge reason why the Blackhawks have been so competitive on a nightly basis. And what's even more impressive is among all NHL goaltenders, Knight is 4th in shots against. The Hawks have surrendered 476 shots on cage when Spencer Knight has been in between the pipes. Despite that, he's 4th in the league in saves with 440 and has stopped 15.6 goals above expected, which is 1st in the NHL according to Money Puck. 15.6 is what Spencer Knight has. Next closest to him is Jeremy Swayman at 13.5 goals saved above expected. So Spencer Knight has 2 more than he does, who's the second placeholder right now. And only 5 goaltenders in the whole league have more than 12 goals saved above expected. So among the best goalies in the NHL, Spencer Knight has a clear gap on top of those guys. And then he also has a 2.60 wins above replacement measurement, which is 1st among all NHL goaltenders. Jeremy Swayman is 2nd, well behind him at 2.2. And then, according to Hockey Reference, he has 4.5 point shares, aka meaning how many points he's truly accumulated or helped accumulate statistically for his team so far this year. That is first among all NHL netminders, and third among all NHL players, trailing only Cale Makar and Nathan MacKinnon. And even before going through those numbers, I was saying, while Connor Bedard is where he's at in the league in terms of goals and points, he's been the best player for the Blackhawks on the ice. I think Spencer Knight has been the MVP and has really been the most impactful player behind the Blackhawks' strong start to the year. And I think that point share metric kind of goes to show it. Only Nathan MacKinnon and Cale Makar for a Colorado Avalanche team that has one regulation loss on the season is ahead of Spencer Knight in that metric. I think that goes to show you how spectacular his start to his Blackhawks tenure has been. Then also a couple more numbers that are really impressive for Knight. He has a .930 save percentage at even strength on the year, stopping 93% of the shots that he's facing. Also has a .917 save percentage against opposing scoring chances. Like, night in, night out, Spencer Knight has been playing at a super high level, and I really hope to see him start to get more buildup from national news networks and national hockey media talking about him potentially being that third goaltender for Team USA, because even though, as I've talked about, I think it's going to be hard for him to get into that group after not being invited to the orientation camp this summer, I mean, the proof is in the pudding with the way that he's been playing so far this season. And then let's get into Arvid Soderblom, who the numbers aren't as fun to dive into on just because of the 9-goal performance that he had on Friday in Buffalo, where, if the Blackhawks weren't on the back end of a back-to-back and didn't have to play the NHL's top team in a couple of days' time, he likely would have been replaced by Spencer Knight. But because of the situation, just kind of had to wear that one. With the loss, he's now down to 3-3-1 on the year, and a goals against average that was in the twos is now at 3.46, and a save percentage that was well above 900. I think it was 913 prior to that game against Buffalo, is dropped all the way down to 881, which is absolutely brutal, man. And I really do feel for Arvid Soderblom, because outside of that game, I mean, he's really had a swift start to the season. And here's just kind of one example of how one real horrible game can impact the season-long statistics. Arvid Soderblom right now has an .882 save percentage at even strength on the year. Prior to the game against the Buffalo Sabres, that was at .913. So two completely different metrics just because of one contest. So I don't want to critique him too harshly, even if the numbers, don't look pretty. They were a lot better looking up until that game against Buffalo, and it's not like, while he did allow some softies for sure, the team in front of him was no better than he was. I mean, it was a really poor effort from the Blackhawks, and sadly Soderblom, his numbers completely deflated because of it. But altogether, more times than not, Arvid Soderblom is, like Spencer Knight, given the Blackhawks a chance so far this year. So despite a goals against nearly at 3.5, a save percentage well below 900 now because of that game in Buffalo, I'm still very happy with the way that he's performed in the backup role behind Spencer Knight for the Blackhawks this season. All right, that is going to take care of Deep Dive 2.0. We'll be having Deep Dive 3.0 next on the show on December 15th, just 10 days before Christmas. Coming up in just a moment, Hawks fans. Before I close things out, still want to briefly talk about what a return from Laurent Brossoit would mean for this Blackhawks goaltender group. Real quick, though, I do got to give a shout out to another one of today's sponsors, which is Game Time. Hockey season is officially here, and nothing beats being in the arena for those opening games. But let's be real. Getting tickets can be a total headache between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before you check out. It's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is go and cheer on your team. But that's where Game Time comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NHL tickets fast, stress-free, and easily. So go and take the guesswork out of buying your NHL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and then use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $20 off on your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for $20 off with Game Time. Segment 3, over the last week or so at Blackhawks practice, believe it or not, the mystery man, Laurent Brossoit, has proven he is a real member of this Blackhawks team, after being absent for basically all of his tenure so far with the organization. Of course, signed a 2-year contract with the Blackhawks back in the summer of 2024, and then went on to have a series of unfortunate injuries. Had to go undergo surgery on his meniscus back in August of 2024. Then, just a few months later in November, needed a follow-up arthroscopic procedure on his right knee. And then this past offseason also had to undergo hip surgery. So 3 surgeries in the last 15 months for Brossoit have left him as kind of a ghost to begin his time with the Blackhawks. I mean, last year, I don't think he was on the ice for one single practice. There were even Blackhawks beat writers who had never seen him around the team whatsoever. It was kind of a mystery what was going on with Laurent Brossoit, but over the last few weeks, he has been spotted skating down at Fifth Third Arena in Chicago, and as of practice on Monday, actually participated in a drill for the first time as a member of the Blackhawks late in that practice session, which is definitely encouraging to see for a guy who's been dealing with so much over these last couple of years, and really injuries have kind of been the story of his entire career thus far. He's only played in more than 20 games just twice in his 10 NHL seasons, but when he has been healthy, he's looked like one of the best, 1B or backup goaltenders in the entire NHL. With the Winnipeg Jets and the Vegas Golden Knights, who he played a little bit to help them win the Stanley Cup in 2023, with the Vegas Golden Knights and the Winnipeg Jets, the last 2 years that he's played, he's had a save percentage below, or a save percentage of .927 and a goals against average below 2.2. He has been really sound, and that's why I honestly thought he was going to take over above Peter Mrazek as the number 1 goaltender for the Hawks last year, but obviously that never transpired. Hasn't been able to play in a single game as a member of the Blackhawks, but it feels like that could be coming at some point. While he still has a ways to go to be returning to game action, has been kind of starting to ramp things up here recently, and I feel like, not to speculate, but I do wonder around Christmas or around New Year's if we could see Brossoit get sent down to the AHL on a little bit of a conditioning stint. But whenever he is healthy to return, Blackhawks fans, it's pretty clear there isn't a spot for him right here, right now. And, when Kyle Davidson signed him, they obviously didn't have Spencer Knight as their future number 1, but now they do. He's playing at an elite level. Arvid Soderblom, outside of Friday night, has been really good as the backup. And then you don't want Brossoit taking away starts from either Drew Commesso or Stanislav Berezhnoi down in Rockford. So I think that makes him a pretty clear trade candidate for the Blackhawks. I wouldn't be surprised if whenever he does get healthy, makes that conditioning stint, comes back up to the NHL, maybe gets a spot start every now and then, 2 or 3 starts for the Blackhawks, and then they try to deal him ahead of the trade deadline, maybe to someone like the Edmonton Oilers, who continue to just have goaltending nightmares. I do think that could be a potential trade candidate here for Laurent Brossoit, because it's pretty clear he no longer has an open spot for him to get consistent reps in, both up in the NHL and also down in the AHL with Rockford, but still feels like there's a ways away until we get to that point, maybe a month or 2. But it is good to see that Laurent Brossoit is healthy enough to finally get back on the ice. I'm sure this time has been very difficult for him, but going to be a fascinating situation to watch unfold whenever Laurent Brossoit is officially given that good, that go ahead to return to NHL action. That's going to close out today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free as well, wherever you may be listening to your podcasts, so that way you don't miss the latest episode as soon as it becomes available. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. If you want, go and check me out on X at Jack Bushman2. My Strictly Blackhawks account is at Talkin' Hockey. Give that one a follow so you don't miss any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Until the next episode, everyone, yes, There will be a show dropping tomorrow on Thanksgiving. Probably going to be an audio-only episode, though, if I'm being honest with all of you guys. But until then, enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays. Happy Thanksgiving Eve. Go Hawks. Let's get a big 2 points tonight against the Minnesota Wild. And I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.